Okay, and basically what we're going to do here is start by looking at, did you guys get a chance to read this paper?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Okay, are you guys familiar with the 2-sample t-test for difference of means? No, not really. All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to start by going over that. So I'll share my screen, we'll watch a video together, and then we will get to the paper.
Kaito grows tomato.
Can you see this? Can you see my screen or
Yeah.
the video?
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
He takes a random sample of plants from each field and measures the heights of the plants. Here is a summary of the results. So what I want you to do is pause this video and conduct a 2-sample t-test here. And let's assume that all of the conditions for inference are met, the random condition, the normal condition, and the independence condition. And let's assume that we are working with a significance level of 0.05. So pause the video and conduct the 2-sample t-test here to see whether there's evidence that the sizes of tomato plants differ between the fields. All right, now let's work through this together. So like always, let's first construct our null hypothesis. And that's going to be the situation where there is no difference between the mean sizes. So that would be that the mean size in field A is equal to the mean size in field B. Now, what about our alternative hypothesis? Well, he wants to see whether the sizes of his tomato plants differ between the two fields. He's not saying whether A is bigger than B or whether B is bigger than A. And so his alternative hypothesis would be around his suspicion that the mean of A is not equal to the mean of B, that they differ. And to do this 2-sample t-test now, we assume the null hypothesis. We assume our null hypothesis. And remember, we're assuming that all of our conditions for inference are met. And then we want to calculate a t-statistic based on this sample data that we have. And our t-statistic is going to be equal to the differences between the sample means, all of that over our estimate of the standard deviation of the sampling distribution of the difference of the sample means. This will be the sample standard deviation from sample A squared over the sample size from A, plus the sample standard deviation from the B sample squared over the sample size from B. And let's see, we have all the numbers here to calculate it. This numerator is going to be equal to 1.3 minus 1.6, 1.3 minus 1.6, all of that over the square root of, let's see, the standard deviation, the sample standard deviation from the sample from field A is 0.5. If you square that, you're going to get 0.25. And then that's going to be over the sample size from field A over 22 plus 0.3 squared. So that is 0.3 squared is 0.09. All of that over the sample size from field B, all of that over 24. The numerator is just going to be negative 0.3 divided by the square root of 0.25 divided by 22 plus 0.09 divided by 24. And that gets us negative 2.44, approximately negative 2.44. And so if you think about a t distribution, and we'll use our calculator to figure out this probability. So this is a t distribution right over here. This would be the assumed mean of our t distribution. And so we got a result that is negative. We got a t statistic of negative 2.44. So we're right over here. So this is negative 2.44. And so we want to say, what is the probability from this t distribution of getting something at least this extreme? So it would be this area, and it would also be this area. If we got 2.44 above the mean, it would also be this area. And so what I could do is I'm going to use my calculator to figure out this probability right over here. And then I'm just going to multiply that by 2 to get this one as well. So the probability of getting a t value, I guess I could say where its absolute value is greater than or equal to 2.44 is going to be approximately equal to, I'm going to go to second distribution. I'm going to go to the cumulative distribution function for our t distribution. Click that. And since I want to think about this tail probability here, then I'm just going to multiply it by 2. The lower bound is a very, very, very negative number. You can view that as functionally negative infinity. The upper bound is negative 2.44, negative 2.44. And now what's our degrees of freedom? Well, if we take the conservative approach, it'll be the smaller of the two samples minus 1. Well, the smaller of the two samples is 22. And so 22 minus 1 is 21. So put 21 in there to 21. And now I can paste and I get that number right over there. And if I multiply that by 2, because this just gives me the probability of getting something lower than that, but I also want to think about the probability of getting something 2.44 or more above the mean of our t distribution. So times 2 is going to be equal to approximately 0.024. So approximately 0.024. And what I want to do then is compare this to my significance level. And you can see very clearly this right over here, this is equal to our p-value. Our p-value in this situation, is clearly less than our significance level. And because of that, we said, hey, assuming the null hypothesis is true, we got something that's a pretty low probability below our threshold. So we are going to reject our null hypothesis, which tells us that there is, so this suggests the alternative hypothesis, that there is indeed a difference between the sizes of the tomato plants in the two fields.
Okay, so did everybody understand that? Hey, Roger, how's it going?
I'm doing well.
All right, thanks for joining us tonight. So did everybody follow that in terms of a t-test for the difference in means?
Yeah, why did they have the times 2 at the end?
Because it's a two-sided t-test.
Oh, okay.
Meaning like the question is what's the probability that would either be, on the left, like further on the left side of the distribution or further on the right side of the distribution.
Mm.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. And if it was just a one-sided t-test, then you would only have it on one side. You wouldn't multiply it by 2. But so the reason that we just watched that video is because in this paper today, I believe they use a mean t-test. And do you guys, so did everybody have an opportunity to read this paper?
I haven't finished it.
You haven't finished it. That's okay. But you saw that they do take a mean t-test, right?
Yeah.
Where they're comparing the means of two groups. And so I just wanted you to have that in your arsenal. Okay, and you saw that they did a diff-in-diff, right?
Yeah.
Did everybody see that when we were in the paper? Yeah. Okay, cool. So what we're gonna go through is, so who can tell me in general what this paper is about?
Like they're missing advertisers and they're analyzing those specific companies that don't report their advertising and then looking at
Exactly.
different factors.
Right. And so why would it be important whether or not you're reporting advertising?
Because it like shifts the price, the valuation.
Hmm. Yeah, exactly. So the reality is that these companies are spending a significant amount of money advertising, right? Let's see, where's the figure on the, I mean, it's a lot of money, right? Every year that they spend on advertising. Yeah, yearly aggregate of unreported advertising among missing advertisers. It's like in 1995, it was 7 billion a year. It's now up to about 10 billion a year. Right. So that's a pretty significant amount of money. Correct? Right. So that's the first thing. The second thing is they don't report it as advertising, but does that mean that like it's hidden completely?
No.
No. Right. So it probably is in SG&A, it probably is somewhere. But they don't simply break it out as advertising, right? Why would that be a problem? That it's not broken out as advertising? Who can make some guesses? So here we find some substantial consequences of such a choice. A large portion of listed firms do not disclose their advertising expenditures and leave billions of unreported dollars each year in an expenditure item managers often consider vital for their market competitiveness and long-term success, right? So we have this idea that in general, advertising is critical, right? It helps brings in customers. It's part of your cost of acquiring a customer, right? And so if you're not reporting it, right, then to one extent, analysts could underestimate your cost of acquiring a customer, right? And why is so if you were to buy a business, would cost of acquiring a customer be an important number to you?
Yeah.
Yeah, right. Because you're like, okay, we want to grow this company, right? Growth is factored into these firms. And so like, well, how much does it cost to grow a company? Well, that comes back to the cost of acquiring a customer. And if the cost of acquiring a customer appears lower than it actually is, could that throw off your calculations relative to the growth of the company? Yeah, right. Do you guys all watch Shark Tank? Okay, no, nobody watched Shark Tank. Okay. Well, on Shark Tank, one of the things that they frequently ask is what is the cost of acquiring a customer, right? And if you remove advertising from the calculation, you're probably understating how much it costs, right? And by the way, if you understate it by $10 billion a year, right, across these firms, that's a significant amount of money that's being underreported. Okay. So let's go to the next thing. Did you guys find it kind of weird that the big four doesn't seem to, or I'll stop. What is the, in terms of the big four auditors, did they seem to take it really seriously or no?
I think not as much as the non-big four.
Yeah, exactly. So the non-big four seem to take it really seriously, right? Where's that diff-in-diff? Yeah, okay. So let's look at this diff-in-diff. Someone could tell me what's happening here. So what is this diff-in-diff? What is the red line?
The year Arthur Anderson collapsed.
Exactly
Oh,
right.
no. Oh, yeah.
It's the year Arthur Anderson collapsed. And so what do we think about the parallel trends assumption? Do we think that these big four, the ones who moved to the big four, are they pretty similar ex ante to the ones who didn't move to the big four or move to the non-big four? You guys see what I'm saying here?
After Arthur Anderson collapsed, they are pretty much similar because they're like kind of parallel after the dotted line.
Well, we're looking at before the dotted line, right?
Oh, okay. Yeah, not then.
The question is, are they similar before, and then do we think they'll be similar after? That's the idea of a parallel trends assumption, right? And so in this case, can someone tell me like what is this? So who are these companies? They're Arthur Anderson clients, right? Okay, so the Arthur Anderson clients, and then after Arthur Anderson goes out of business, they have to switch and get a new auditor, correct? And some of them switch and they switch to the non-big four, and others of them switch to the big four, right? And the ones who switch to the big four, like their numbers remain approximately the same, right? In terms of missing advertised firm ratio, right? So like they're about here, they spike up just before Arthur Anderson collapses, and then they spike back down. And then they're about constant. And these guys, they come way down, right? Like near zero. So it seems like the big four are not as stringent about this missing advertised firm ratio as the big four, correct? Okay. Is that surprising to you guys? Like, do you think that why are the smaller auditors more stringent than the bigger auditors? Let's see what the paper has to say. In figure 9, we graph the diff-in-diff trend, starting with all treated firms audited by Arthur Anderson by 2001, compared to untreated firms, all other firms. In panel A, we see a sharp decrease in Arthur Anderson clients missing advertised post-treatment. In panel B and C, confirm that the type of auditors a client moves to after Arthur Anderson collapse strongly predicts their disclosure choices. Starting with panel B, we divide Arthur Anderson's former clients into those that move to big four versus non-big four. We find that either client group adopts their new auditor's averages. These new clients of big four start having a missing advertised ratio of about 0.2, like the missing advertised ratios in the untreated big four clients. New non-big four clients, on the other hand, almost cease their non-disclosure behavior, reaching a missing advertiser ratio that is on average lower than 0.05 and quite akin to non-big four clients at around 0.03. And then finally in panel C, we focus on new clients of big four auditors and visually compare untreated versus treated clients with each big four firm. Consistent with our prediction, we find that former Arthur Anderson clients tend to report advertising at similar rates to the clients they ended up with after the move. Former AA clients and current clients of Deloitte and KPMG seem particularly intertwined. However, even Arthur Anderson's clients that ended up with EY and BYC, which had lower missing advertising ratios, seem to quickly adapt to their new auditor standards and thus reveal missing advertiser proportions like these auditors' existing clients, right? So basically what they're saying here is that you adopt your auditor's choice, correct? Okay. So to test our experiment in multivariate regression, we report our results in table 6 in a diff-in-diff OLS setting. What do we think about a diff-in-diff OLS setting?
Do we go over why we need the diff-in-diff again?
Sure. Linglong, can you explain why we would use a diff-in-diff here?
To examine the whether changing a factor would influence the trend of something. Like look at I don't know how to describe it, but we're looking at actually I'm not quite
Right.
sure.
Here, I mean, we can talk about it here, right? So this caption basically explains it. So the following table depicts the impact of a firm's externally motivated auditor change on their missing advertiser status. What is an externally motivated auditor change? Is it a choice by the firm?
No, like they're forced to.
They're forced to, right? And so the benefit of their being forced to from the outside is that basically there's no real choice except for who they join next, right?
Mm.
So that all the Arthur Andersen clients are mandated to get a new auditor, but then they do have a choice of who they pick. And so both columns are iterations of an OLS panel data fixed effects model. What does that mean?
Oh, like they add the controls.
Yeah, there are fixed effects. And then so post is what after the post is after Arthur Andersen collapse, right? And then what is treatment? Treatment is whether they were previously an Arthur Andersen client, correct? Okay, so the question here is like, after Arthur Andersen collapse do Arthur Andersen clients behave differently than non-Arthur Andersen clients? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay, and then what is this post interacted with treatment variable?
To look at the correlation between the two, between post and treatment.
Yeah, so you're looking to see basically after Arthur Andersen collapses, do the clients who were previously with Arthur Andersen, are they different from the clients that were not with Arthur Andersen? Right? And the answer is that they are. And in particular, that they become much less, or they do missing advertisers less, right? Does that make sense? Why would they do that? Like, so basically they fail to disclose less, which means that they disclose more, right? Like they basically stop underreporting their advertisements, right? Why would that be the case?
Because they went to like more non-big four ones.
Yeah, they could have gone to more non-big four ones. What about if they were like sort of under the radar? Or sorry, what about if they were like on the radar of regulators? Does that make sense? Like people are like, okay, you were with Arthur Andersen. We know that Arthur Andersen like was doing some sort of sketchy behavior because it just collapsed and Enron collapsed and that whole thing, right? And so now like they're very much on the radar. And given that they're on the radar, these specific firms are gonna want to, be more transparent because they feel like they're on the map of regulators. Is that a possibility?
Yeah.
Okay. And then so is there any difference when we add controls? A little bit, right? It's a little bit smaller effect, but the reality is it's still pretty similar. You guys see that?
Yeah.
Okay, so the reality is like, well, even if you control for how big the firm is and the growth, versus value versus firm age, like the reality is that this whole thing of previously being an Arthur Andersen client does seem to matter, right? And then similarly, I guess let's explore Shiloh's question more, which is if before they were like in the treatment in the non-treatment group, does that contain clients who were previously customers of non-Big Four?
Yeah.
Yeah, it does, right? And it also contains clients who were previously clients of Big Four, right?
Mhm.
So you've got non-Big Four and Big Four both in there. And if we can assume that the non-Big Four was more stringent ahead of time and the Big Four was less stringent, right? Then on average, it's kind of going to be like in the middle, right? Because are we going to see any change post Arthur Anderson?
Oh no.
No, because if you look at this post variable, the post variable doesn't actually seem to have any effect, right?
Mm.
Pre Arthur Anderson versus post Arthur Anderson. All right, so basically everyone else stays the same, but the only people who do change, it appears, are the Arthur Anderson, right? And Arthur Anderson previously what? Were they previously higher or lower in terms of missing advertisers?
Higher.
Higher. And where do you see that? In which variable? Which variable represents Arthur Anderson's clients?
Like
In-
post.
No, post is after whatchamacallit. Post is after Arthur Anderson collapses. What variable represents Arthur Anderson?
Treatment.
Treatment. So previously, the fact that treatment is statistically significant, and by the way, statistically significant at what level? What does 3 stars mean?
Something to do with the standard deviation.
No, it's not standard deviation. It's the level of significance. So 1 star is what, Roger? What significance?
Is it like one center of deviation?
It's 10%.
Oh,
It's statistically significant at the 10% level. 2 stars, Shiloh, is what percent?
15.
No.
20.
What is the standard significance level that's used in research?
0.05.
Exactly. 5%. So 2 stars is 5%. Ling Long. 3 stars then is what?
7.5%.
No. So 1 star was 10% significance level. 2 stars is 5%. So
I see. Okay.
so what is 3 stars?
2.5.
No, 1%.
Okay. Okay.
So when you guys read academic, like for the rest of your college and grad school careers, like there's going to be 1, 2, or 3 stars next to the number, or no stars. 1 star means 10%, 2 stars means 5%, 3 stars means 1%. If there are no stars, what does that mean?
Not significant.
Not statistically significant. Exactly. And then so the fact that treatment is positive and statistically significant at the 1% level, that means that what? What do we know about Arthur Anderson clients? They previously were what? Higher or lower in terms of underreporting advertisements?
Higher.
Much higher, right? And I mean, guys, look at this number, 0.213. That's like enormous, is that not? Or 0.16, almost 0.17. Are you guys not impressed by this? It's okay. And then, okay, so but that's like a huge number, right? Because on average, the Big Four, what is the Big Four missing advertiser number? You want me to go up? Do you guys know this? They said it. We just talked about it. It was like .0, it was like 0.2, right?
Oh, yeah.
And then what was the non-big four number? Anyone? I'll give you a hint. It's on my screen now. Ling Long,
0.03.
0.03. So basically, this is like substantially all, right? This is a huge number. This is like the difference between non-big four and big four, right? Roger, you with me? Okay. So then in the post interacted with the treatment, it's basically, right, then how do Arthur Andersen's clients react after Arthur Andersen collapse? They go down by more than, they go down by about 10%, right? 8% or between 9 and 11, right? It seems. Okay. And so they actually don't go down all the way, right? Okay. And the other thing is, do you guys remember when we did that other paper and the post interacted with the treatment is like the change? Right. So you put in post treatment and then post interacted with treatment. Right. So it's not just like a 10% drop. It's you have to like plug in all the numbers to get the new numbers, right? You guys remember that from that other class we did? Okay, good. So in general, if you looked at all these numbers, like, so treatment would be a 1, right? Arthur Andersen's clients, treatment would be a 1. So let's say they're at 0.17, right? And then the treatment here would be a 1, right? And the post would be a 1. So then they would go from 0.17 down by how much? Somebody tell me, Shiloh. If we plug and play here. So 1 for post, 1 for treatment gets us to what, 17%, right? So these guys.
It got down like 0.25.
Yeah, and then we have post 1 and treatment 1, right? So we're at 0.17, and then we add in this, right? Minus 8%, 8.5%. So what's 17% minus 8.5%? It's like
25.
No, 17 minus 8.5. So it's like 8.5%, right?
Oh, yeah.
So these guys generally go baseline, right, up from about 17% down to about 8.5%. And then depending on the total assets, right? So let's say for the big firms, somehow the big firms then go up, right? So they go from 8.5 back up to about 16%, like the biggest firms, right? And the smallest firms are less, right? Because the smallest firms, let's say they're maybe in the bottom 1% or something. So they're going to be like up from 8.5% to like 9.5%, right? Why would bigger firms have much more missing advertisements than smaller firms? Roger.
I'm not really sure.
Ling Long. Bigger firms have much more understated advertisements.
They generally have like
More
the
money.
ability to make a lot of advertisements, so it would reasonably be higher.
Exactly. So this Y variable of missing advertisers, what units is that in? Right. That's a key question, is like, how is that variable being measured? Let's go back here. The dependent variable is missing advertisers. An indicator dependent variable taking the value of 1 if the firm is a missing advertiser in and 0 otherwise. Okay, so basically, does everyone know what an indicator variable is? Is it the amount that they're not disclosing, or is it just whether or not they're not disclosing?
Just
They're
what?
kind of like a dummy variable, like 0, 1. So
Exactly.
Yeah.
So then can someone explain to me why the bigger firms would be so much more likely to have why would the bigger firms be so much more likely to have understated advertising revenue? Do you think big firms advertise more than small firms?
Yeah.
Yeah, probably a lot more, right? Like, I mean, think about, you guys are inundated, and we're all inundated with advertisements from like Coca-Cola, with advertisements from Geico, with advertisements from Capital One, right? And so the probability that they might be more likely to just advertise in general, right? And so if they're more likely to advertise in general, then they're more likely to show up in this database. The other thing is, what's the condition of joining the database? Advertisements of what? What level?
And like 1 million. I don't remember.
Jello, you're a machine. Exactly correct. Advertisements of more than 1 million. Are bigger firms more likely to have advertisements of more than 1 million than smaller firms? Yes. So part of this could just be that, these firms are more likely to be included in the database, right? They've got advertisements more than 1 million. They're generally better known, right? Like maybe the people who coding the database, recognize Coca-Cola, recognize. So anyway, and then book to market. Who can tell me this book to market situation? So a higher book to market, what does that mean? Is that value or growth? High value, high book, low market. Is that value or growth?
Value.
Yeah, value. Probably in the range of value, right? What about in the range of value? What about a low book and a high market? Probably in the range of growth, right? So for some reason, value firms are less likely to understate their advertisements, right? And growth firms are more likely to. And this somehow like exceeds the total assets, or exceeds the size variable. So why would this be the case? Value firms are more likely to underreport their advertising. It's also not statistically significant, right? Or is it, 0.067? It's like at the 10% level. Who can think of so value firms are more likely to report advertisements, and growth firms are relatively less, right?
Yeah.
I honestly don't know. Why would value firms be more likely to tell you and growth firms less?
Isn't advertising kind of more important for growth firms?
Yeah, maybe. And maybe what the other thing is, maybe they're also trying to keep the information from competitors. Right? Growth firms might be out there trying to hide it, right? Because maybe they think it's proprietary. Like, okay, if the growth firm is spending $10 million a year on advertising, maybe they feel that's proprietary, right? whereas the value firm feels that it's less proprietary. Whose business do you think is more under attack, value or growth? Growth, right, by a lot, because it's basically they don't have a lot of assets and yet they have a really high market value, right? So you can imagine that like venture capitalists would come after growth firms. Does anyone want to come after a business with really high assets? Is it like, what would be an example of a business that has really high book value?
Like a railway company.
Exactly, like a railroad, right? So like how threatened is a railroad by competitors? Like, okay, would you like to go go spend $200 billion on railroad tracks and try and buy land all across the US and then like lay the track and then go buy the trains, right? And then what are you going to earn? 7% return on your capital? Like, do you think any venture capitalists would want to compete with that business? No, I'm going to go raise $200 billion and then go try and lay track across the US. Right, that's not right. So that may be one reason. Like, they'll tell you what they're advertising. They don't care, right? And if anything, they may be like, look at all these costs we have to, right? So like this plus all the trains plus all the track, like feel free, right? Come and get me. Whereas the growth, they may be like, we're not spending that much. Oh, we could target them. All right, we're cool on that. Does everybody feel like, is this helpful? Everyone feels like they understand what's happening?
Yeah.
Okay. And so the real reason we do these optional classes, you guys know what the real reason is? Do we care if you understand this paper in particular? No. What are we trying to get out of this? We want you guys to be able to design your own papers, right? And design your own tests. Does that make sense? And we want you to be able to like interpret the variables. And so what I want you to take away from this class is from like tonight's session. The reason that we're all spending time together tonight on Sunday night is I want you to be able to recreate this test in your own research. Okay. And it's in order to recreate it, you really have to understand it at a high level, right? Which is why we're spending the time together right now. Okay. Can someone give me an example of in their own research paper, how would you use a diff-in-diff like this? Who can give me an example? Well, somebody tell me what a research question is you might have. Does anyone have a research question? Okay. All right. Well, then, so while we talk about the next table, think about a research question and think about how you would use this diff-in-diff design to help answer the question. What about table 7, conference calls? So what's happening here?
Like they're trying to analyze if the analysts ask about the advertising for missing advertiser versus reported.
Right. So if the executives first of all mention their opening statement, if the analyst asked about it, or answered by an executive, like if an executive put it in the Q&A section, right?
Mhm.
Okay. And so in general, if a number is missing, do you think it's more likely or less likely that an analyst would ask about it?
Less.
Less likely, right? And that is what they find here. So missing advertisers, let's see here. So if they're reporting, then 39% of people or so 40%, almost 39% of the time they mention it, right, in the opening statement. 25% of the time analyst asks about it. 32% of the time the firm discusses it, right? So what's kind of interesting about this is the executives included in their announcement, right, in their opening statements on the transcript. Is that like these guys are, how sophisticated are these people running large firms? Like when they're talking, when they're making statements to analysts, right? Do you think that they're talking off the cuff, or do you think these are prepared statements?
Prepared.
Definitely prepared, right? These people are running like multi-billion-dollar firms. They're talking to analysts who at giant investment banks like JP Morgan, Goldman Sachs, etc. Do you think that you would prepare your, and they're being paid probably millions of dollars a year? They're definitely preparing their statements ahead of time, right? And do you think they're preparing them carefully? Yes. Yeah. So if they're going to say it in their opening statement, chances are they're trying to draw their attention to it, right? They're trying to draw analysts' attention to it, right? 40% of the, so 40% of the transcripts, so if they're trying to draw people's attention, why? Why would they want analysts to be thinking about this? Why would they want the market to be thinking about it?
Because they think it's important for like the value of their company.
Yeah, it could be they think it's important for the value of the company. Maybe they want their competitors to know. And they're like, hey, we're spending all this money, right? So what do we say? A value company. Maybe the value company, like the railroad, is saying, look, we're spending all this money on advertising. We have all this money in plant and equipment, right? Like, basically, this business is very difficult to take down, right? We have a huge economic moat. So the big companies, they are more likely to undisclose. So these missing advertisers, only 16% of them draw attention to it, right? It's a steep drop. All right, what is this thing with true zero?
Like firms that actually don't do advertising.
Yeah, I think so. I think it's firms that don't do, yeah. So then what are these t-tests? Or first of all, what are these excess odds ratio? By the way, if you don't know something in a paper, what do you do?
Google.
Yeah, you Google it, or you Google it, or more specifically, if it's something unique to the paper, you Control F, right? And you go like try to find it where they talk about it. All right, so if we can't Control F, then where do we go? Let's see table 7, right? Where they discuss table 7. Starting with panel A, we find unsurprising that reporting firms are more likely to discuss advertising in their opening announcements and answer them than true zero firms. Okay, so this is then running a similar test in panel B by using a random sample of 150 observations from each group, we find economically and statistically similar results. Our results suggest that reporting firms choose to discuss advertising in their opening statement about 39% of the time. T-tests suggest that these ratios are much higher than those of missing advertising firms. Taken together, we demonstrate that analysts just ask questions about advertising expenditures mostly when the information is already given. On the other hand, we also examine the difference between missing advertisers and true zero firms. Missing advertisers discuss much more about advertising activities in their opening statement, receive slightly more advertiser related questions, and mention much more about advertising relative to true zero firms. Such substantial differences indicate that managers of missing advertising firms think that their marketing and promotions are important information for analysts. The associated expenses are thus material information and should be reported based on the reasonable investment standard. Are evident, does everybody understand that point? So missing advertisers don't disclose that at all, right? They don't disclose the advertising, and yet they still talk about it more than firms that don't do any advertising at all. Do you guys get that? Roger, you with me? Okay, so like firms that do no advertising, they obviously don't talk about it because it doesn't exist. Or they talk about it, you know, very minimally. And then the ones that do advertising but don't disclose it, they do report it much more, right? Than firms that don't do it at all. So given that they're talking about it, does that suggest that it's important? Yeah, right. If they're going to mention it in the opening statement, let's see here. So 16% of the time they mention the opening statement. Okay, so this is basically, it's 4.4 times as much, right? Reporting true zero. So missing advertisers compared to true zero, this is almost significant, right? Do you guys get this? What is this number here? If I asked you to calculate that on an exam, how would you do it?
Wait, was that the thing we watched at the beginning of class?
Yeah. So you subtract off the mean, right? You take the difference in the mean, and then you divide it by the standard deviation of this one over the sample size, right? Which is like 24. And then you divide the standard deviation, I guess, squared over this sample size, right? Is everybody with me? Ling Long? Yes, okay. So this is how you get this value. And the answer is that it is, you know, these missing advertisers do talk about it more than the true zero. So again, the reason we're talking about this, guys, is because when you run your own test, when you write your own paper, which, by the way, as you guys, I mean, I think we have at least 2 published authors on this call, other than myself. And so, given the difference, is this kind of a number that you would want to run? Look, is this a number you guys would put in your paper? And would you know how to run it? You would. Okay. Bless you, Michelle. And so why do you okay, do you guys know why this number is included? What does this add to the story? Materiality, right? This number adds materiality. If this number were 0, if there was no difference between the missing advertiser and the true zero, what could you argue? It's not material. Does that make sense? Okay, so the reason they include, like, the purpose of this table is likely, you know, in significant part this number. And this number is telling you that the missing advertisers disclose much more than the true zeros, right? Like, so it's not, they're on their own volition. right? In their opening statement, they're not even asked by analysts. In their opening statement, they're mentioning it. And then, oh, by the way, they're also inserting the answer into the Q&A. So it's clearly material if they're gonna bring it up on the call, right? Okay. That's the significance of table 7. Or at least table 7, panel A. Panel B then pulls 150 random firms. All right, what's the significance of this? What's the significance of the random firms?
To make sure that the subsample represents the overall trend.
Yeah. Exactly. It's, you want to make sure that right, as Ling Long said, the sample panel A of the largest firms is not misrepresentative, right? Because the largest firms behave differently in general than small firms. And so it's like, okay, well, now let's rerun it with 150 random firms to see if these numbers are consistent. And so are they?
They're pretty much the same.
They're pretty much the same, right? So basically big firms don't necessarily behave differently than you know, firms in general, right? Okay. And so so again, the purpose of this class tonight is for you guys to run your own write your own papers, run your own research. So when you write your own papers, when you run your own research, do you think panel B is worthwhile? Like, would you include panel B in your own paper? Yes, right? I agree. I actually think I think it's very good that they did this. So why, can someone give me a reason why like large missing advertisers might disclose but smaller ones wouldn't? Ling Long.
Because larger firms have the ability to advertise more, so they would reasonably.
Yeah.
Like
So maybe
most
just like advertising is an important part of bigger firms, right? They do it more often, so they're going to talk about it more often, right? Whereas smaller firms, it's not really as relevant, right? And so, but then clearly not, because 18 point. So what's interesting is these guys actually, on average, like smaller firms, I don't know if we can say this, but so this distribution has to be smaller, right, than this one because it's randomly selected. So I guess on average, smaller firms are talking more about advertising. So do you guys see the significance of that? It's like, oh, well, maybe only big firms care about advertising, and so they're talking about it. But then like, well, but actually smaller firms are talking more as a percentage about advertising. Right. So does that strengthen or weaken the materiality argument?
Strengthen.
And if you notice here, right, this was like barely statistically significant. It's not even 5.6%. Is that statistically significant on what level? 5 or 10? Roger.
Which one is that?
This one. Is this statistically significant at what level?
10%.
10%. This is statistically significant at 5%, right? And almost 1%.
Mhm.
Right. So it's like, right. So this is really driving the point home that advertising is important at big firms and at small firms. Right. And actually, you could argue more so at small firms. So that's why you would include panel B. Okay, now talk to me about table 8. OLS. Are alarm bells going off in our head that, oh, they're using OLS here? Should, when you see an OLS regression with stock prices, do you immediately ask yourself, why is this not using Fama Macbeth, right? You guys with me? Okay, so the following OLS table predicts stock mispricing on firm reporting behavior, comparing reporting firms to missing advertising firms. For our mispricing measurement, the dependent variable, we use 2 different measures in the following way. In columns 1 and 2, we use price to book, similar to Dong, Hai, Schleifer, and TO. In columns 3 and 4, we use standby U and Yuan measurement from 2012, which we download from Standby's website and covers data up to and including 2016. So who knows what Standby U and Yuan is? To measure the direction and degree a stock price deviates from its fundamental value. Okay, so a stock with a higher price to book is considered overpriced. On the other hand, SYY is the arithmetic average of a firm's percentile for each of the 11 anomalies and ranges between 0 and 100. Similarly, a stock with a higher SYY score is regarded as overpriced. Right? So what are these 2 variables they're using? They're measures of what? Walk me through this, guys. We're gonna be done after this table. This is our last table.
Like stock pricing.
Exactly. It's a measure of how overpriced the firm is. Correct?
Like price deviation.
Yeah, price deviation. So what's the test here? So the question is, if you have more missing advertising, like if they underreport the level of advertisement, does that cause the firm to be more overvalued? Right? And so it seems like as the level of missing advertisement goes up, the price to book generally goes down. Right? And the SYY generally goes down. So they're actually less overvalued. So let's see what the explanation is for that. So these estimates suggest, okay, so let's say the coefficients on missing advertiser are this and this, respectively, with these estimates suggest that the movement from a reporting firm to a missing advertiser is associated with approximately a 45 percentage point drop in the price to book ratio. In columns 3, we present the results from a regressing SYY score on the indicator variable, missing advertisers, and an extensive list of control variables and fixed effects for industry and year. The estimated coefficients are -1.5 and -1, respectively, and indicate that relative to reporting firms, hidden advertisers are 1 point lower in stock valuation. So, and by the way, is the missing advertiser continuous variable or a dummy variable? Roger.
A dummy variable.
Dummy variable. So basically the question is, when you switch from a reporting firm to a missing advertiser firm, does your valuation go up or down? Down. Right, good. Okay, so our results suggest that missing advertisers are discounted in their stock prices relative to reporting firms, indicating that financial intermediaries do not bridge the knowledge gap in missing advertisers' disclosure choices. Moreover, under the market efficiency hypothesis, the difference in stock valuations associated with firms' disclosure status of advertising expenditures highlights the materiality of advertising and related information that some firms and auditors have neglected. Do you guys see that? So basically, why is he? So the market is what? Price protecting, right? They're saying, okay, well, if you're not going to tell us how much you're spending on advertising, we're not going to pay as high a valuation for your firm, right? And the reason they're not going to pay as high a valuation of the firm is they can't sort it out. Right? They're like, we don't know if you're the high type or the low type, so we're going to assume that you are the what?
No.
Low type, right? Because when you report it, well, then we know, right? So we give you the higher valuation. Right? When you don't report it, we just assume that means you're the low type. And so therefore we're going to give you the low valuation. Does that make sense? Okay. Is this our firm of fixed effects being used here? In this regression?
No.
No. So someone talk to me about that. How concerning is that firm fixed effects are not used?
Probably concerning because you're talking about like valuation of a firm. So
Exactly. Yeah, for sure. Shiloh's right. Right. So like if in this case, if there were firm fixed effects, what would the test be? It would be the same firm, right, who at one point was a reporter of advertising and now is no longer, correct? So a firm that the same firm that went from being a reporter to now a non-reporter, right? Or vice versa. How good a test is that? If you also have other controls, other time variant controls in. So how good a test is that? If you had firm fixed effects,
Yeah, that'd be good.
that would be good, right? But we don't have firm fixed effects. So are we concerned about omitted variable bias here? Like, do you think there's something else that could be driving this story?
Yeah.
Yes. Do we think that so number of analysts following is a good control to have, right? Because it sort of gives us a sense of like how much coverage the firm gets, right? But do we think that there could be another omitted variable that's helping to drive the decrease in the valuation other than just this non-reporting of advertising? There easily could be, right? If this, maybe these firms are just, even though they're in the same industry and got on, how did they calculate industry? Is that the Herfindahl-Hirschman index? Like, what is their industry variable would be one question. I think who knows what HHI is? Okay, so if you don't know what a variable is, where do you go and look it up? All right, so everybody, so what I want you to have these skills. So go right now on Google. A common measure of market concentration. Okay, so this is like how concentrated is their business, right? What is an example of really concentrated business? Is the soda drink market concentrated or not concentrated?
Not
Would it have
concentrated.
It is concentrated.
It's not concentrated because a lot of it's a monopolistic industry.
I would say it is concentrated, right? Why is the soda business concentrated? What percentage of the market cap do Coke and Pepsi make up?
The majority.
The majority, like probably the vast majority. Right. So I would say that in fact, the soda business is highly concentrated, right? What about like the I don't know, like some business with very limited barrier to entry, like moving, right? Like professional movers. How concentrated is that business? Would that have a low HHI or a high HHI?
Low.
Low, right? Why? Because what's the barrier to entry on that?
Low.
It's low.
What about space? Would space have a high HHI or a low HHI?
With space.
Like space companies that go to space.
It'll be high because
High HHI, yeah. Right, because the barrier to entry to going to space is enormous. You need like billions and billions of dollars. And then railroads would, Roger, high HHI or low HHI?
High.
High, right. So basically you've got this situation, and then so that we still don't know what they use for industry. Right. And so why are we, can someone tell me why we're going through this paper so carefully? What am I trying to do? I care whether like that you know how to calculate industry? Actually, sort of, right? If you're gonna intern for us, probably I do a little bit. But like, what is my bigger concern? You guys are gonna go to the best universities in the world, right? All of you. You're probably gonna end up getting advanced master's degrees or PhDs. So basically, for the next 10 years of your life, you're gonna be reading these papers, right? And you're gonna be discussing them with faculty, first as an undergrad, then as a PhD student. And so how important is it to your academic career that you be able to read these papers carefully and really know what's going on? Extremely. I can't even express to you how important it is. Like the faculty will judge their view of your intelligence based on how well you can read the papers, right? So the reason I'm going through this carefully is regardless of what field you're in, you basically need to figure out all of this on your own. Right? Like you need to be able to read a paper, starting from nothing, and then like use Google or Control F in the paper to figure out what's going on, including possibly replicating the paper. So like when I say, so I'm showing you now, like if you don't know what the Herfindahl-Hirschman index is, like Google it, right? First look for where they describe the paper, see if it's in the appendix. And then if it's not there, then Google it, and then like think through examples, right? Think through the railroads, think through whatever. Okay, similarly with industry, and this is our last thing, how do they calculate industry? Why would we care how they calculate industry? Because industry can be a very noisy measure, correct? Right, like, and if they're using NAICS codes or whatever it is, like consumer durables, how noisy is a consumer durables as a measure of industry? That could be sneakers, that could be like toothpaste. I mean, that could be basically anything, right? So if they're then using industry fixed effects, does that give you some, are you then a little bit concerned? Yeah, because these are not apples to apples comparisons. Like sneakers and I think what they're using is the Fama French 17. Let's look.
Yeah.
Yeah, they are. Right? Industry classifications. So first of all, other. How accurate is other as an industry classification?
It also has
Trouble.
the most observations.
Yeah. So anyway, so the point, yeah, it had, and good point, Shell. It has the most, right? The next is retail stores. How, retail stores can vary dramatically, right? Apple is one type of retail store, and then like a bakery is another type of retail store, right? So that's another huge difference. So then if you were like sitting in class at Harvard or whatever, Yale, whatever wonderful schools you guys will be blessed to attend, would you want to bring this up? Yeah. And specifically, like if you were sitting in a class at Harvard or at Yale or MIT, you wouldn't just say the industry is a, you would say Shiloh's comment, right? You would say, look, for example, other has 3x more than the next type of industry, which suggests that actually this is like a very noisy measure, and therefore we're not sure industry fixed effects is going to be that helpful, and therefore this whole sort of table 8 then kind of puts it into doubt, right, about whether or not this is really measuring what you think it's measuring. And then you say, okay, well, how can we fix it? You say firm fixed effects. Is everybody with me? Okay. All right, that's the end of today's class. Did everybody see that Andrew sent out the office hours thing? Okay, so Linglong, I think you're like very, very close to being done.
I sent to fix the merging the first query because it eliminates out a lot of like samples. Only keeps 7 rows, which is concerning. So I need to figure that out, and the rest I could deal with.
All right, figure that out. But you have 3 office hours this week to do that. So pick one, and then email Andrew and copy me. Tell me that you're going to come to whichever one you plan to come to. Shiloh, I think you're a little bit further behind Linglong just because of the other night. But what Linglong did was basically she reset the index. And by resetting the index after dropping NAs, that basically facilitated the matching process. So go through her code, which is shared with you, and look for where she resets the index. Because that facilitates the then left join in the next line. Okay, and if you have any questions, we're meeting 3 times. Roger, where are you on the replication?
I think I still have like 4 or 5 blocks
to go.
Yeah.
All right. Well, Linglong's code is getting quite close, and so if Linglong, if you're willing to share with Roger, feel free to do so. And then Roger, take a look at Linglong's code, and also take a look at the solutions. Linglong or Shiloh, could either one of you share the solutions with him?
I think I have the solution in R.
In R, yeah. So make sure your code like matches that, and then come with questions to one of Andrew's office hours this week.
Okay, sure.
All right, guys. Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. Great job.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good night.